everyone, I'm Christy Horner and I'm here with my colleague and friend Faith Behrens, and we're two of HSLDA's educational consultants. So we're coming to you today with a little bit of a chat about frequently asked questions and special needs homeschooling.
Yep, we're excited to be here. And like Christy said, I'm one of the special needs consultants with HSLDA. And we want you guys to know that we are listening. So if you have questions today or topics that you would like to see addressed related to special needs homeschooling, to please drop those in the comments below. And we're really excited to be with you today.
And we have giveaways. We have this awesome swag bag, which is our HSLDA educational consultant tote bag. And inside it's filled with goodies, a coupon code for our HSLDA Online Academy. What else is inside, Faith?
Well, they're going to get this cute little pen. We refer to this guy as Ed, our special ed consultant pen. I love his hair. Anyway, so they're going to get a pen. They're going to get a wonderful water bottle.
And then we have some resources, books, and a homeschool planner inside. So if you'd like to enter to win this gift, then you can just drop down in the comments below and give us a hashtag special needs possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I use my tote bag all the time and my water bottle. All right, well, we also have some things that we wanted to talk about to share real quick.
Yeah, so before we get started, I think one of the first things I'd like to talk about is just the definition of special needs in general. And I know when we're talking to families and when we're talking amongst ourselves, we understand that special needs encompasses a wide range of need, from severe special need all the way through gifted and talented, and pretty much anything in between. So when we're talking about special needs, that to us is a general term. It's a broad term that we use to encompass how we're going to meet our students' needs in homeschooling. And so that's really why we're here today, to talk about all of those needs and how to meet your students' needs.
Right, exactly. Because a lot of times we'll get calls or comments and people will say, well, you know, my kid just has some attention issues. They're really not special needs. And then you get the other end of the spectrum. My kid is nonverbal, autistic. Is that a special need? So I'm glad that you brought that forth to just clear up what we mean by that.
Right. So as far as special needs and labels go, I think I'd like to also, maybe we can talk a little bit later about this, talk about the need for a label, or does that, or in your opinion, Faith, do you think that matters if they have a formal label or a formal diagnosis versus understanding, you know, where your child is in homeschooling? So when we say special needs, that doesn't necessarily mean that your child has a formal diagnosis.
Correct. But so I always tell parents, I think that they shouldn't be fearful of labels. To me, it's a diagnosis. And then once you have that, it really helps with understanding what's going on with my child. So, so I look at that as that diagnosis as being beneficial. And then also getting a formal diagnosis can also open the doorway to getting special services or documenting the need for accommodations, things like that. So I always tell parents, let's not operate out of fear, because with that knowledge brings freedom. And I know for me personally, I have a learning disability, which wasn't diagnosed until college. So once I got that label, that diagnosis, it really freed me up from all the other mislabels that I had put on myself. You know, like, you're not able, you're not smart enough, you're stupid, or whatever. No, this is a learning challenge, and this is how we're going to work around it. So I just encourage parents not to fear labels. And so since you asked that and we're on that topic, just real quickly, I just want to show a couple of resources that are my favorite that I know will address that concern. This is one of my top picks. It's San Tyler's 7 Tools for Cultivating Your Child's Potential. And I love it. And my copy is all dog-eared and underlined and starred. And I go to it all the time. It is just so encouraging, because all of our kiddos, no matter what their diagnosis, no matter what their label, they all have such unlimited potential. And this is just a really encouraging book. And then another oldie but goodie, but if you're homeschooling or you're thinking about homeschooling and you have a child with a diagnosis or a child you suspect has any type of disability or different ability, be sure to check out Sharon Hensley's Homeschooling Children with Special Needs. This is just really a top pick to have in your teacher resource on your bookshelf and to refer to.
I love that book.
So now I am really excited, Christy, because we have TJ Schmidt with us, and he is one of our staff attorneys. And I know that he represents the state of Arizona and Florida and New York, where things have really been heating up and hopping lately. So we're excited to have TJ jump in, and we want to hear about you and your family, and we're just happy to have you with us.
Well, thanks, Faith and Christy, for having me. It's exciting to be here with you all on Facebook, right down the hall. But one of the privileges that I have here at HSLDA as a staff attorney, I've been here for nearly 18 years, and just the privilege of serving homeschooling families all across the country in 10 different states. Just a little bit about myself. Both my wife and I were homeschooled. My parents began homeschooling my siblings and I when I was in the 2nd grade, and my wife was homeschooled basically from 1st grade all the way on. And we're now homeschooling our own 7 children and on our own homeschooling journey, just as many of you are, and meeting the needs of our children and the challenges that each of them have. And so obviously in my capacity as a staff attorney, I handle a lot of different questions, not only on individual state legal issues, but also on issues like what we're going to be talking about today on special needs questions and what am I legally required to do. And so hopefully we'll have an opportunity to try to answer some of those questions for you. And I know Faith and Christy are a great resource, and what they have to share today, I'm certainly very interested in hearing as well.
Thank you for being with us, and I'm sure some questions are going to be rolling in. In fact, we already have somebody asking, can we please repeat the name of the book, 7 Tools for Cultivating Your Child's Potential? And that's by Zan Tyler, and we love Zan. She's
one of my favorites.
Yeah, she's a great speaker and a great encourager. So 7 Tools for Cultivating Your Child's Potential. All right, so we're going to wait for some more questions to start rolling in. Please feel free to make comments, ask questions. We are so thankful to have TJ on with us, so we want to be sure to address whatever needs that you have. Right now, Christy, I did want to ask you about accommodations. A lot of times we get questions from parents saying, you know, what are accommodations? Is it okay for me to give accommodations? I know our legal staff gets questions about accommodations, particularly as it relates to standardized testing. We get that question a lot, so I would like TJ to jump in on that too. But let's talk about accommodations.
Yeah, let's. So it is a frequently asked question, and I think the easiest way for parents to understand what accommodations are would be to understand that it's really just a workaround. So it's a way of leveling the playing field for your student. And so, for example, my son has mild dysgraphia. And so when he was younger, instead of making him run away from the pencil and paper, you know, down the hallway crying from the paper and pencil, we would simply hand him a whiteboard and a dry erase marker. And that leveled the playing field for him. He was able to carry on the same assignment. So they're completing the same assignment with a little bit of a ramp, if you will. And, you know, as he's gotten older with that, now we are allowing him to type his assignments instead of writing them. But, you know, as we have offered those accommodations, his capability, his skills have risen and grown over time, and he's not finding the same difficulty because we've allowed that little bit of a crutch to get him where he needed to be.
Right.
So
yeah, that's a good one. And allowing for oral narration and dictation, particularly for kids with dyslexia and language processing problems. Those are great ways to accommodate. And using assistive technology, I know for my daughter, early on, she had some visual processing problems. And while she was a good decoder, she needed print enlarged, and she needed a tracker while she was, reading to track print. Sure. So those were simple ways that we accommodated her. And then when she got older and of course got technology, being able to enlarge print and change the background lighting helped her, and she could follow along with her textbooks on audio. So audiobooks, that's another great way to accommodate. So I think I'm going to ask TJ to jump in here. And can you talk about, is it important for parents to document accommodations? And can you address the questions about, is it okay to offer accommodations on standardized testing if that's required in their state?
Sure. Well, so for parents to keep documentation in their homeschooling program, I think it's very important for parents, regardless of whether you have special needs or not. Each state has different requirements, and generally most states don't require you to keep track of accommodations, at least not that I'm aware of in any of the states that I'm responsible for, and checking in some of the other states as well. I'm not aware of any states that require you specifically, but I do think it is a good idea for you to keep records of your accommodations. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. It helps you in any communication that you may have with your private service provider on keeping track of those accommodations that you're providing. Plus, if there's ever a question, your child maybe goes either back into a more traditional educational setting, or maybe into a college, keeping track of those accommodations are, I think, very important and can be very, very helpful in that. Getting to the question of whether, how do you provide accommodations? Well, from a legal standpoint, again, I'm not aware of any state that requires you to have anything in particular to give an accommodation. I mean, typically, as Christy had mentioned, we'll have questions on testing accommodations. How do I give accommodations through testing? And typically, in those situations, you're going to check with the test publisher or the test provider where you purchase the test, and they'll be able to tell you what would be necessary. And typically, if you have a private service provider or professional who gives you a recommendation that they need time and a half, or that they need double time, or that they might need a scribe, or might need some other assistance, you can provide that kind of accommodation simply through the recommendations of your private service provider. Obviously, if you also have, and we'll talk about kind of these issues in a little bit, but if you also have an IEP that provides an accommodation or provides processes that would be available for your child, obviously you can use those accommodations that are kind of already pre-authorized or pre-permitted in. But generally speaking, you don't need to go through any kind of legal process to be able to just provide accommodations to your child on a day-to-day basis. If you need to spend more time in a particular subject because they're struggling, or if you see something going on in your child's life, you have the flexibility in your homeschooling program to meet those accommodations, and you don't need to go through maybe as a formal process as you would if you were in a traditional school setting. You can do those accommodations. So hopefully that'll provide some information to our members. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything to those comments.
So I think that's great, TJ. Thank you. We have a few questions rolling in about high school and special needs, and how does that work? And I think that's a really big question, but one we do get a lot of.
Right, and it's related to what we're talking about. So let's talk about the documentation. Let's talk about accommodations, because I'm in the midst of this boat right now. So obviously, I've been accommodating my daughter all along because homeschooling is an individualized education plan. And so some families may have already had an IEP if they've been in public school. We were not in that boat. My daughter went to public school in kindergarten, and then we pulled out. We suspected learning disabilities all along. And I did not actually get her officially tested until fairly recently and diagnosed, but I had all my documentation of the accommodations. So I think that's important. And I know that you have a lot of documentation, but here's why it's important for the high school, for these questions coming in about high school.
Right.
We went to the community college to do dual enrollment for second semester, and they're asking for a copy of the IEP. Well, I don't have an IEP because she never got public school services. So fortunately, I had drafted a written student education plan, which is kind of the homeschool version of an IEP, which we can offer a template for people who are interested. And then I had documentation of the accommodations that we've been naturally providing at home, and you know, our own homeschool records. So I was able to give that to meet with the Special Student Services Department at the community college, as well as provide a copy of her official diagnostic testing that we had done privately. And they're going to work with her and give her the accommodations she needs.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was the first question, is where's a copy of the IEP? Well, we're homeschoolers. We don't have an official IEP. We have a student education plan.
Well, and a lot of times I think that process is daunting. And so that's why we do recommend, and that's why our legal services, our legal staff does recommend keeping good records. And, you know, for us, the record keeping process started much, much sooner than the school process, if you will. So in front of me is a big daunting black binder. And I didn't bring this to scare anybody, because this is actually 10 years worth of record keeping. So 10 years of record keeping, and it's really simple. I know it sounds overwhelming to keep all of your records, even if you are an organized person. But if you're not an organized person, naturally, I just wanted everybody to see this is a 3-ring binder, and inside we don't have any specifics of what you would keep inside, and it's not being turned into anybody, right, TJ? So I want to reinforce that this is something that I'm keeping for my records. So when down the road, if and when I am in the same boat that you're in with your daughter, I can look back, and I'll just tell you some of the things that I have in here are psychological testing, intervention. We did some listening therapy, so we have some intervention notes and occupational therapy notes, and we saw a nutritionist at some point, and so we just have all of this page protected and in a really quick format that I can go back and pull this, so that whenever I want to create an SEP, this is just one more source of documentation. And it's also been really handy at the end of the year when we go to turn in our assessment at the end of the year, and I just meet with my portfolio reviewer. And this is a source of documentation to say, hey, this is why we do what we do. You know, if you have a dysgraphia diagnosis, you might not see as much of the written work, you know, as you might with my other students. So this is just an easy way to organize. So a binder, a 3-ring binder, and you can put in there whatever you think you might need.
Yeah, and I think that's excellent, just to have everything organized, you know, come up with a organizational method that works for you. Everybody's homeschool is different, and everybody has different styles of record keeping. I can tell you that my friend Christy here is a lot more organized than I am, but it really comes in handy. And another reason why this is going to come in handy, and for those who have kids that are entering high school or applying for ACT and SAT for those, you know, high stakes testing, if you want to ask for accommodations, they ask for a whole slew of records and documents. So, because they really want to see a history of the child's struggle. So being able to have everything handy at just one stop and just pull it and copy it off and to send in for your application to apply for accommodations.
It is really hard to go back you know, we would struggle to go back if I had to rely on my brain to pull back the last month. So then separating multiple kids and multiple record keeping habits that exist or don't exist would be really hard, I think, sometimes. So yeah.
So record keeping is I think important, and That's a great way to do it with the binder. So let's see here. Do we have any questions?
We have some
in?
questions. So how can I certify each period? If I homeschool my kids, do they have to present an exam? When and where? So TJ, would you like to help Josefina out with that question?
Sure. So that's a great question. A lot of times we get from parents, when they're homeschooling their children, and how do they, provide that certification or documentation that their child has moved on. A lot of times I think it's going to vary from what curriculum you're using, or even what subject you're doing. A lot of times you'll be using a subject that may have a lot of testing or evaluation built into it. Typically you think of that in like math. And so you're going to have documentation of them completing lessons and tests, either quarter tests, lesson tests, or even maybe a year-end test. In many other subjects, though, you're going to be documenting their completion of the work, whether you're using a textbook or whether you're providing other curriculum. You don't have to have an overall assessment. You can provide just a narrative assessment, if you will, of the child's progress in that subject. Obviously, I think it's more important once you're getting into high school, because typically it's high school level that you're going to want to be keeping those very careful documentation on the credits that they've earned, the courses that they've completed in anticipation of their completion of high school and moving on into college. Obviously, documentation earlier grades is important, but it's not going to be as vital for you to provide maybe as much documentation about the coursework or certification of the coursework that they've completed. Unless, of course, the only difference would be as if your child is going to be going back into a more traditional school setting at some point in time, whether it's a private or public school. It's pretty common for that public or private school to request some kind of documentation on what have they completed, what coursework have they completed. And so keeping records in that manner may be helpful if you anticipate that may be, you're only homeschooling for a certain season or time. So hopefully that helps. There's no right or wrong way in which to keep documentation. There's no assessment that you necessarily have to complete. And you can provide that documentation really in a manner that works for your program and for your child, documenting. And we have, besides Christy and Faith, who provide a lot of valuable resources for our special needs families, we do have our high school consultants and other early years consultants who can help you in keeping some of these record keeping and transcripts and documents. It's a whole nother topic, but we have a lot of that information on our website as well.
Right. And people are welcome to call. If you're a member, call, speak with your legal staff or talk to any of us, and we can help you with really specific questions that will meet your unique needs and your unique situation. Yeah. We do have a question from a lady, a mom. My oldest 7 is autistic and my youngest has ADHD. I struggle with getting my oldest child to write, and I'm struggling to find something to help him. And I think this is kind of pretty common. And then, I don't know, particularly for boys seem to be a little bit slower in developing with literacy skills. So one thing that I would say is to really tap into whatever your child is passionate about and interested in, and have rich conversations. And one really great way to just accommodate is to be the scribe. And in educational circles, we had something called shared writing, language experience approach, where the child would tell the story and the teacher would write it down and we would read it back together. And that's kept in a notebook. Charlotte Mason methodology, it's oral narration and recitation, and then they would work on memorizing. So those are some ways that you could accommodate. Do you have anything you want to chime in?
Well, I'm rewinding a few years to our homeschool, and I remember using a Lego curriculum. My son loved Legos, and most kids do, right? So there was a Lego curriculum where you're creating stories, and so he was great with the story creating part, but he didn't really want to write that down. And so it actually utilized technology and an app called the Story Visualizer. And so you would actually build the story and narrate the story, and then you could take a picture of it and turn it into a really cool storyboard. So I think there's so much out there in terms of curriculum and helps and things like that that are really fun. You know, homeschooling doesn't have to be problematic. You know, our rule in our homeschool is that nobody cries over schoolwork, me or the children. And so that's kind of our cue. If somebody's upset about something that they're doing, then we kind of pause our homeschool and say, okay, let's take a deeper look at what could be going on. And you know, for my little guy, that was writing for him as well. So whiteboards are great, pencil grips and lined paper. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. We do have another question coming in about an SEP, and Sherry's joining us late, and she's asking, what is an SEP? So an SEP is really the homeschool version of an IEP, and we call that an SEP. It's a student education plan. And we do have, for members, we have downloadable student education plans that we can share, and we have resources.
Yes, we do. We have a template
Yeah.
we can share.
And that makes it so easy to create, you know, walk through step by step. And that's one of the things that we do as educational consultants on the special needs team is walk families through that process. And it is a form that they fill out, but there are other things that go into creating that SEP. So, you know, creating goals for your child, and it can get intense. So we're happy to help walk you through that process.
Right, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I always tell parents to pick one or two areas. That could be a social area, you know, language skills, or it could be reading, it could be an academic area, or it could be behavioral. But pick one or two areas that are glaring at you. Like, you know, it could be just functional, adaptive, functional skills, you know, where the child is struggling with. For my daughter at 8, it was taking a shower from start to finish. And that was a really important goal. Like, I really wanted her to be able to self-navigate just some of those self-help skills. So that went on the plan for that year. So we can help parents. How do I write the plan? What does the plan look like? We have the templates, and happy to help with that.
I think you touched on something really important too there with the life skills. And we do get a lot of questions about, you know, as moms, as parents, we're thinking that homeschooling, you can get caught up in the academics, but it is really very important, especially if you have special needs children, to walk through those other life skills that they're going to need. And so capturing that in an SEP is a really great way to combine your homeschooling bookwork and all of those things in together so that they're in a cumulative plan. And so we do get that question frequently, you know, how do I do all of these things and make it work? How are we going to show this at the end of the year if we have to report? How do we make all of these things work together? So TJ, would you mind jumping in on that? You know, how does that work? How do you combine the academics and the life skills and prove that to maybe your Board of Education at the end of the year that was an important thing for your family to capture?
Sure. So, I mean, I think I fully believe that as a parent, you know, each individual child that you're educating, you are developing an individualized educational plan for each child. And so you have the flexibility to meet the needs of your child at the place that they're at. And incorporating things like life skills into your academic learning can absolutely be done. You know, some of the states that I have are very, very regulated. For instance, New York. Other states, maybe perhaps such as Arizona, is not as much regulated. But even a state as regulated as New York, you can absolutely incorporate your life skills into your home educational program. In fact, a lot of the times we have parents who are teaching even math concepts or other concepts that they want to pass on to their child in more of a life skills environment. So that maybe they're working on preparing a meal and they're having their child measure out ingredients or help them calculate various measurements in those recipes that they're providing. And so they're incorporating not only the life skills that they're wanting to pass on, but also incorporating more of the academic side of things. And so I think the ways in which you can do that are, limitless. And keeping track or records of that, I think it really just depends on how much your state actually requires you to report. So for instance, in a state like New York, you're required to do quarterly reporting, and you describe each quarter what progress or what the child has done. Typically, we recommend that you do that by subject, but a lot of times, if your child is, maybe there's a lot of different subjects that are kind of combined together, you can provide more of a narrative description of what the child is. And not only can our special needs consultants help you in developing an SEP or a special education plan, but our legal assistants can also help you in meeting the legal requirements, the record keeping requirements that you have to do. And so helping you navigate. Again, like I said, I think there's no one set way in which you have to do this, and each state is different as far as how much record keeping you must keep. Keeping good documentation of the accommodations that you have is a good idea, like we've been talking about throughout. But I don't want any family to feel like they have to be bound by one particular method or mean, to do that. One thing I'd also wanted to kind of maybe address, we have been talking about IEPs and SEPs, and I think Christy gave a great explanation of an SEP. So just to contrast that, an IEP is typically, when we're talking about an IEP, we're talking about an individualized educational plan that is developed through your local school district or maybe through the private school. There's very strong connotations with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There's certain processes by which the school has to go through to evaluate the child, to identify their disabilities, and then to develop that individualized educational plan. A lot of homeschooling families, the questions that I think both Faith and Christy and we in the legal department get is, am I required to do that? And you're not required to do an IEP. It can be helpful, particularly families who want to get a free evaluation. They want to be able to go through that. You can, and you have a right, everyone would have a right to get that evaluation. The problem, obviously, or not necessarily a problem, but the strings that come along with that is once the IEP is developed, then federal law requires an annual reassessment or re-examination of the IEP. And every 3 years, they want a reevaluation of the child. And so just knowing the differences between an IEP and an SEP may be helpful to you. And again, in this time frame, we don't maybe have the opportunity to go through all of the differences and reasons why to choose one over another, but know that you can go to Faith, go to Christy and our other special needs consultants for the SEP. They can help you. And as Faith mentioned, we have a lot of great documentation and forms that are available for you in helping that. And as an IEP, if you want to know more about that or you need some help in determining whether this would be the good choice, I would suggest you talk with us here at the legal department or talk with Faith and talk with Christy more in detail about the needs of your individual child and your individual family.
Thanks, TJ. So as we're talking about the IEPs and the SEPs and homeschooling just being an individual plan for your family, would you like to share with us, or have you seen that be beneficial in your own homeschool, or can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think all of us, in our homeschooling journey, we've all had different experiences. And, as I said, my wife and I were homeschooling our own 7 kids. And I should say my wife's doing most of the homeschooling, of course. And, we're very, I believe and have, obviously through my experience here at HSLDA, believe that each family has an opportunity to develop the individual program that works best for their family, for their dynamics, and for their child's. And that's certainly something that I've observed, as you've already mentioned, each of you and your families and your children. So, each child is different, and each of them are going to have different struggles. Some of them are going to be gifted in a particular area. Others are going to have, the child may struggle in writing. I mean, my son, extremely good in math, frustrating to my wife because he'll often do math in his head. And, she's always telling him to write the problems out to explain how he's doing it. But yet writing is a struggle, and writing is something difficult. For one of my daughters, reading, she picked it up. In fact, probably picked it up primarily because my wife was teaching my older son to read, and she was reading at 4. And then I have another daughter who, really struggled with reading, and, really was challenging to my wife. As you get into your homeschooling environment, I'm sure you'll find you get into a rhythm. And so we were going along with a rhythm, and our 4th child came along, and reading was a real struggle for her. And it wasn't until she was probably 8, 9 years old that we really began to see some progress in this area. And throughout that time, though, our homeschooling program allowed us to have, take a step back, to focus on her needs, to seek some outside counsel and guidance, read up on some issues, and really try to focus on what she needed. And now when I come home, she's most likely with her nose buried in her book. She still has some challenges that she's working through, but our homeschooling program allowed us to, meet her needs in a way that she needed. And I think that's really the benefit for all of our families. And I know that you see each and every day in the help that you're able to provide those families.
Right. So I'm so thankful, just hearing all of our different stories. I'm just really, really grateful, thankful that we're able to homeschool and make sure that, as we're meeting their needs. One thing I'm super thankful for is, that the love of learning can continue to grow. And, our relationship, through my understanding of any special needs or areas of struggle, my kids, they understand that we're making some accommodations, and they appreciate it. So I think it just is really great that it improves the overall relationship and health of your relationship in homeschool, when you're coming together to, make changes that they might not otherwise have been afforded.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. So we have some other questions rolling in here. Testing. There was one about testing. What testing would you recommend for a nonverbal child who's developmentally around 2 but is 7 years old?
So I'll jump in there about testing. I think that working with your medical providers or speech and language therapists are a great place to start. There's developmental, checklists. There's like the Peabody picture. So there's lots of tests that medical professionals, psychologists, speech and language pathologists can administer for students who are nonverbal. And then also just even parent observation and, helping the student use a communication board, but you can alter how you assess a student. You can have a student, pick up cards or point or indicate or eye gaze. So you could actually do an assessment with a student, or with your child, but then you could accommodate how they're going to answer or how they're going to indicate. So,
Sure.
And those are types of questions. We're happy to do phone consultations with families and help you to figure out which test would be the best to give and maybe how to accommodate your child.
So another question, Sherry's asking, she's in the state of Georgia, and she's asking, do I have to do state testing that the public schools are doing in 3rd, 5th, and 7th grade? I think she's asking what grade she would be required to test.
Mm-hmm.
Can you weigh in on that, TJ, or?
Yeah, and let people know where they can find their state specific requirements for testing.
Sure. So that brings up, both of these questions bring up some really good questions, and some questions that we come into play a lot of the time. So the best place to get all the information on what your state actually requires is just to go to our website at hsld.org, We have state laws and some frequently asked questions, homeschooling 101s for each state. And so a lot of times you'll find some of that information just readily available. I did want to kind of back up a little bit, and then we can kind of address Georgia specifically. But one thing that I think you can find in every single state is, as a parent, typically you get to determine the grade that your child's at. And you don't need to be focused on their age in most cases. And so I know in the previous question, the person indicated their child was about 7 years of age, and yet maybe maturity or age-wise is more several years younger than that. And so you don't need to try to put your child into a particular box and think that, okay, they're this age and therefore they must be at that grade level. Most of the states, you're going to be able to determine what grade level that they're actually working at. And I would focus on that grade level that they're actually academically in to before you even really think about the testing. There are a few states, though, that would not be true. One state that I'm responsible for would be Oregon. In Oregon, you're going to be determined to be at a particular grade based on a particular age. There are several ways in which you can work out that, so don't despair if you're in Oregon. You do not have to necessarily be testing your child and making sure that they're meeting that child's what would be expected. There are alternatives. In fact, in Oregon, you can develop a privately developed plan similar to what we would call an SEP for that child. So to address the issue in Georgia, first of all, again, I would suggest that you look at where the child is academically. Are they really at the 3rd grade level? Are they at the 5th grade level? And then based upon that determination, if they are at that level, then you would do the testing. Again, as we talked about earlier, the accommodations, certainly if your child needs some accommodations, you most likely would be able to do that. And I'd really encourage you, if you have some additional questions, to please call us. Again, take a look at the information on our website. We have a pretty detailed legal analysis on each state that you can find. We have the Homeschooling 101s on our website that you are available for anyone. And then obviously as a member, you can obviously contact both Faith or Christy or us here in the legal department to answer your particular question for your child. And we should be able to assist you in making sure that you're complying with the state law and that you're also meeting your child's individual needs. So hopefully that will help answer that question.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, so along those lines, I just want to share something. So we actually have an assessment kit that can really be helpful for parents. Let's say you're pulling out of public school and you don't know what your child's functioning level is exactly. You don't know where to start. I know my child, used to have an IEP at the school, but now I'm going to be homeschooling, and maybe you want to draft a student education plan. So we rent out these assessment kits called the Brigance. And there's 3 different ones. So we have the inventory of early development, which is for birth through developmental age 7. We have the comprehensive inventory of basic skills, and this is for pre-K through 9th grade. And then the transition skills inventory assessment is for middle and high school students. All of these assess basic functioning skills of reading, writing, language, there's fine motor, gross motor, listening skills, all kinds of things. And so we rent these out through the bookstore, and this is the student record book, but it does come in a binder. These are extremely helpful. They're not norm referenced, so they're not standardized, so it wouldn't meet a state standardized test achievement requirement, but they are very helpful in helping you as the parent to know, where is my child functioning, what gaps do they have in skills, what do I need to focus on,
Right.
and to get that plan in place for teaching. And it's really great also for progress monitoring. Like, we used to give this every year, spring to spring, and I could see my daughter's progress every year,
Right.
just compared to herself.
And I think it's really user-friendly. If you open it up, it's actually dual-sided so that your students on the other side of the table and it's scripted. So it's very, very user-friendly to parents, and it's not intimidating to the children most of the time because they're very short tests, and parents are actually doing the record keeping in these books. So, and you can see progress easily because the first time you do it, I think is in pencil, and the second time it's in a second color, and so on and so forth. So you can actually see that documented progress over time, which is just really helpful.
Right.
So I love these. They're you can get these through the online store. So hopefully we can drop a link to the Brigand so that everybody can find those.
Right, and if parents rent those and they have questions about how to administer it, or now what do I do after I've given it, that's again where we can come in and do a phone consultation and help parents come up with plans, teaching plans, and then also even, well, what curriculum would be good fit for this kiddo.
Right. So we do have a question. Melanie's asking if she has a student with an IEP and she's wanting to pull him from public school, and this is a question we get every day, and he does receive accommodation. So he has an IEP and he's receiving accommodations. TJ, could you speak to how a parent would go about pulling their student from the public school if they already have an IEP in place?
And should they drop it? Should they not drop it? Do they even have the option of keeping it open?
Pandora's box is open.
So sure, we can try to address a lot of those questions we get, as Christy mentioned, just about every day. And one of the things, again, as a member, that I would really encourage you to do is to feel free to reach out to us here in the legal department, because we can help you in answering some of these specific questions for you and your child. But generally speaking, just because your child has an IEP and is in the public school, you don't have to be fearful. You have certainly an equal right to pull your child out and to begin homeschooling. A lot of times, it really depends on the time of the year. If you're doing it now in the middle of the school year, there may be a few other things that you need to be aware of, keeping a good paperwork trail of withdrawing the child to make sure that there's no unexcused absences or truancy issues. With an IEP in place, some states will allow you to continue to receive services as a homeschool student. And so some of the questions that you would also need to ask is, do you want your child to continue to receive some of those services? Can they receive those services? Those are, again, things that we can try to help you answer. A lot of the information, or some of this, is on our website as far as what state actually would allow you to be able to continue to receive special education services and what level. And so there's no hard and fast answer for a lot of these questions. It's going to be individual to your family and to your child's needs, but you absolutely are going to have the right to be able to pull your child out. Faith also was questioning, well, what about, should you continue it? A lot of that is going to be dependent upon, what grade level your child is at. As I mentioned earlier, in IEP, typically there is an annual review that can be done with or without the child. There's no full reevaluation at that point in time. Often it's just based upon what's already in the record. And so your school will typically, if you pull your child out and are homeschooling them, they'll typically contact you every year and say, hey, we're going to have another IEP meeting. And so the question is, do you want to continue to do that? I would say it's probably more likely that you would want to continue that for two main reasons. One, if you're wanting to receive services, obviously you're going to need to continue those. If, though, you don't want to continue services, you want to meet the child's needs privately, you don't want to have to be burdened by kind of the restrictions and the oversight of your local school, then you may be able to just decide, you know what, we're going to step away, we're going to decline those services. Most of the time under federal law, you just can't, doing that doesn't erase the IEP, it just simply, you're declining services. And I would always recommend that a parent just be very clear that they're going to be meeting their child's needs privately in that context, because we've all experienced some level of bias or perception from the public school officials, and it's very easy for children with special needs who already have an IEP, for the school district to say, well, this family is denying the child has special needs or denying their child these services. And that's not at all what most of our families are wanting to do. They're wanting to take the responsibility of educating their child at home. They're wanting to play more of a role in actually educating the child. And so just when you're withdrawing the child, formally acknowledging and saying that, yes, child is going to be having their special needs met privately, and just making that very clear from the outset will potentially eliminate that whole aspect of the school coming after you for not meeting the child's special needs. It doesn't happen very often, but it's something that I would certainly recommend. And then finally, another reason or context to talk about keeping the IEP is if your child's in high school and maybe they're going to need accommodations, you haven't developed this long plan or documentation in your homeschooling program of the accommodations, you may want to keep that IEP because they're going to be going to college in 2-3 years. And that way you can have the documentation of the needs and accommodations that are just going to be readily available for that college. So again, like I said, there's a lot of different components or aspects to this question, and I'm sure we don't have enough time to address all of those, but know that you can talk to us here at HSLDA, you can talk to us in the legal department, you can talk with Christy, you can talk with Faith, and we can help you in navigating all these questions.
Right. So to piggyback on that, we had a question come in and say, where can families get these evaluations? So if you are going to provide services in a private manner, how do we go about navigating that?
Right. So I'll jump in. And I mean, obviously, TJ said earlier, parents they have the right to go to the school district to get an evaluation. I mean, our stance is private is best if at all possible, but, and he may want to chime in there, but I always recommend parents to start with their medical doctor, and particularly if the student is struggling with learning, rather than just jumping into a full psychoeducational battery of testing with a private psychologist, which it's time consuming. It takes place over several days, and it's also pretty costly, and it's often not covered under your medical insurance. I always tell parents to start with a good speech and language pathologist, because oftentimes kids are having learning problems and it's rooted in language processing. So see an audiologist, see a speech and language pathologist. Typically, if you get a referral from your medical doctor, a good portion of that's covered under medical insurance if you have it. That's a really great place to start. And then you may want to maybe seek out a private professional like an educational consultant or a reading specialist or a dyslexia specialist, and get maybe some informal or some less costly assessments done, and then you can go further into assessment if you feel like you need that.
Right. And we do here at HSLDA, we have compiled a list of homeschool friendly providers. And I know sometimes that's a concern, meeting a professional that may have great intentions, but don't quite understand how you're meeting their needs or how you plan to meet their needs, or really even homeschooling. So we've interviewed and maintained a database of professionals, so our members can call in and ask us for a speech and language pathologist that's homeschool friendly in their area. So they can just give us a zip code and we can try to help them locate someone, that would be a good fit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I saw earlier there was an interesting question that I wanted to address. It was like, what's the benefit of getting the documentation? What's the benefit of documenting your child's disability? And I think we talked a little bit about that earlier, but one of the benefits is it just helps you know what you're dealing with. Another benefit is it can open the door to accommodations. Again, you'll have that documentation should the child need extra support later on. So getting that formal documentation can really come in handy later. This particular parent said, so you are covered if your child's not on grade level. And so I will say that personally as a parent, my son was struggling a lot. Dad's dyslexic. I have a learning disability. You know, poor kid had it coming from both directions. And I was concerned, you know, that he wasn't going to be able to be on grade level when we
Right.
did that standardized achievement test that we do in the state of Virginia. And so I went to the audiologist and I got the diagnosis of auditory processing disorder, which we suspected.
Mhm.
Because then should anything come under question, well, this is why he's struggling and he's not on grade level. It's because of this processing problem.
Mhm.
So that's been beneficial for us.
Yeah, and practically, I think practically you can use that to guide your curriculum choices, your schedule, and you know, scheduling and homeschool plans are a totally different Facebook Live. But yeah, so I think it's a practical tool. So it's not just record keeping and fulfilling, you know, record keeping for the future, but practically speaking, I think that's helpful.
Good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Erin asks, how often should you do the Brigance? And I know you said you had done this year to year in your homeschool. We did this actually in our homeschool just to see how things were going. We do a portfolio assessment every year, and as my child's teacher, I know pretty much, you know, where they both fall. But I just thought it would be interesting to do. And yeah, so you can rent this as often as you'd like. You could do it in the middle of the year when it's not quite as busy. I will say that typically there is a wait list for these in the spring and sometimes in the fall, early fall. So if you can get this in the off season, then you might be able to dig into it, and families get to keep this for, I think it's a week. If they need a little longer, they can just communicate that at checkout time. So you could actually check this out and buy multiple books and do several children at one time.
Right. So it's really completely up to you. If you're just pulling out of school, you want a baseline assessment, but if you want to use it to show progress, let's say you're doing a portfolio review every year, it can be a great way to do that. So it's up to you.
Yeah. So it looks like we are just about out of time. And so TJ, thank you so much for joining us and handling those hard questions that we aren't really prepared to answer. I know everybody really appreciates hearing from you. We appreciate it. And if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and maybe that'll guide a future conversation that we have. And we're also going to drop some podcasts about special needs homeschooling and some helpful resources. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, my friend Faith. And we'll see you next time. Everybody have a great week.